Over the past year of 2023, I managed to read more than 100 books. While it was a goal I'd considered throughout previous years, it took setting the goal officially to make it possible. I'd always read frequently before, though not always as often as I would have liked. Therefore, in setting the goal, I hoped not only to relieve my feelings of FOMO around the great books that were out there, but to develop a habit of regular reading, which I more or less achieved, only dropping off when the goal was completed. Mostly, it was a positive experience. In the future, I plan to do a video explaining why you shouldn't read 100 books in a year, as there were some drawbacks to the challenge. But overall, I enjoyed myself and wouldn't be opposed to repeating it in a different year. During this year, I had several insights. Some were more surprising than others, but I wanted to share the 5 things I learned from reading 100 books in a 12-month period. Before we dive in, I'm Riley and this is Otherworldly Fiction. On this channel, I rant about books, discuss lore and literature, share my bookish opinions, and offer the occasional writing advice. If any of that sounds like your cup of tea, hit the subscribe button. For the most part, I enjoyed reading 100 books in a year, but over that time, I learned 5 things. Number 1, originality is rare. When I say that originality is rare, I don't necessarily mean that every book is copy and paste, or that they aren't original in their own ways. But what I did observe was a repeat of the same ideas. This will be most obvious if you stay within one genre. And as someone who mainly read fantasy, it wasn't hard to pick out the most overused tropes. Personally, I'm not too bothered if an author uses a familiar framework, provided they have something unique like quirky characters or a strange magic system to keep me hooked. But I still noticed it. Some readers will be turned off if a trope is used too much, even if there's nothing wrong with it on its own. And pickier readers than me have complained about the proliferation of the same ideas. Within the fantasy genre, the ideas I noticed the most included the oppressed underclass, the evil monarch, the rebellion, and the chosen one. Brandon Sanderson used all of these tropes in Mistborn alone, though he earns credit for subverting those tropes and creating the best magic systems I've ever had the pleasure to read. Other books I read which used some or all of these tropes included the Shadow and Bone trilogy, The Hunger Games, and the works of Sarah J. Maas, though I still enjoyed how each author approached the familiar ideas. For the most part, each series still found a way to stand out. For example, sun magic or shadow magic aren't something I've seen a lot of, even if the chosen one trope has been done to death. And I always come to Sarah J. Maas's books to hang out with her characters more than anything else. That said, for many readers, the repeated use of such tropes, even if they're approached in an original way, can be a turnoff, and I can't blame them. With fantasy, you should be able to imagine literally anything. But instead, you end up with another scheming king, a cruel queen, or a jaded prince who sneers at everybody. Plenty of romantasy readers are over the fated mates trope, and those who read extensively are at risk of getting burnt out on what can feel like a paint-by-the-numbers approach from authors. Of course, this isn't to say there isn't originality. You just have to look for it, which brings me to my next point. Books can be weird. If you dare to look beyond the BookTok hits or most popular novels within a given genre, you'll find some truly strange but truly wonderful books. Unsurprisingly, fantasy has some of the weirdest novels out there, but it takes some research. Sometimes going through a favorite author's backlog can reveal the gems, since more established writers might have been less commercial when they first started out, or became weirder in their later careers, as their big names allowed them to experiment. Even more often, you'll have writers who manage to earn fame with only one book, while the rest of their library and their name sank into obscurity. Everyone has heard of The Haunting of Hill House, but how many people are actually familiar with the work of Shirley Jackson? Those born in the 80s, or who have an obsession with werewolves, may even have heard of In the Company of Wolves. But Angela Carter, the original author, is again forgotten. The most well-known name when it comes to unusual fiction is Anne Rice. Everyone has heard of her, and Interview with a Vampire has become a classic. But Interview with a Vampire is a part of a longer series. And if you're looking for books that are unlike anything you've read before, they're worth checking out. The work of authors like Anne Rice, Shirley Jackson, and Angela Carter go to some strange places if you're willing to look beyond those classics of theirs which achieved commercial fame. Truly unique books exist, and the originality of books like Shirley Jackson's We Have Always Lived in the Castle or Anne Rice's Prince Lestat in the Realms of Atlantis isn't to be overlooked. Though I'm not kidding when I say some of these books are downright weird. If you can keep an open mind, reading the weirdest literature has to offer can be refreshing. In Realms of Atlantis, Anne Rice introduces aliens to her vampire chronicles, and Jesus makes a cameo in the series too. Number 3. Popularity is fleeting. In keeping up with new and old books alike, it wasn't long before I observed something. Popularity, at least in the case of some books, is fleeting. While certain authors, like Sarah J. Maas or Brandon Sanderson, have staying power, other writers and books that were all the rage can be forgotten, to the point where it's like they've never existed. There was a time when you couldn't spend 5 minutes on BookTok without coming across a die-hard Cruel Prince fan. But now, despite the fact Holly Black is still releasing books in the same universe, people are barely talking about her or the trilogy she penned. Other series, like Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archives or Shatter Me, have more staying power, and A Court of Thorns and Roses seems set to dominate the conversation for years yet. But other books, which were read by everyone and their mothers, have vanished suddenly, leaving me to wonder if the books really were that great, or if they were good, but not good enough for a fickle audience. As a writer and a bookworm, I find this tendency to forget books sad. After all, while no one would expect a book to be at the top of bestseller lists forever, seeing a book be completely forgotten, to the point where nobody will even remember the book 5 years from now, is pretty depressing. When it comes to everyone's current obsession, Fourth Wing, only time will tell whether or not the books become cemented as classics, like ACOTAR, or if they, like other explosive debuts, become virtually non-existent in 2 years' time. Insight number 4. There's always more to read. This revelation is both a blessing and a curse. It doesn't help when you're a mood reader, because then you discover even more genres, styles, or authors you'd like to binge. It's a lie I tell myself every year. If I just buy these 20 books, I'll be happy. Not 3 months later though, I'll be purchasing another pile, and it goes on and on. BookTok is the worst for giving me FOMO, as my brain has decided I need to read all of the books. Hardly a realistic goal, but one my head insists on attempting. Then there are all those top 100 books lists. I might pick 20 off such a list and be content with them. But after I've read those 20, another 20 behind them start to look equally attractive. The problem is bad enough if you only read one genre. As someone who primarily focuses on fantasy, there are easily hundreds of books on my TBR from that genre alone. However, if you're someone who reads multiple genres, then you're really in trouble. I've started to develop a taste for the genres of gothic and horror, and I've reignited my passion for classic literature. So there are a whole pile of books from those sectors for me to explore. If you discover an author you love, that can be a problem too, as just one writer might pen 20 books plus. The average reader could spend a decade reading Stephen King or Brandon Sanderson. Eventually, I'd like to dive into the genre of thriller, as I enjoy family drama, dysfunction, and books that explore the psychological aspects of their characters. But I've had to put the pleasure off because there are already too many books I want. Ultimately, you'll never be satisfied. If you, like me, increase the number of books you read and buy, absorbing as many as 100 books, you'll still be discontent. There are so many great writers and stories out there, and no amount of time or money will ever be enough to enjoy them all. Number 5. Privilege is required. In relation to the last point, some level of privilege is required if you're serious about not only reading books, but collecting them. You don't have to be rich, and lovers of classic literature can find everything they want for free from Project Gutenberg. But for those looking for the latest hits, like Fourth Wing, it can be expensive. While I try to get the majority of my books as paperbacks or used, there are readers who insist on having first editions, hardcovers, and sprayed edges. Half the frenzy around Fourth Wing was people trying to get the prettiest copy available, and even I, after waiting for several months, had no choice but to buy the book as a hardcover, if I wanted it at all. For readers looking to make content, especially for BookTok, the problem becomes even worse, as people will seek out special editions of older books so as to impress their followers with how beautiful the cover art or illustrations are. We've all seen those monthly Fairy Loot unboxing videos, and the ubiquitous book haul adds up financially, even if you do buy used. Over this year, I probably bought around 100 books. Most were used and shipped in from the UK, but that's still staggering if you think about it. The fact is, if I actually added up what I spent on books, I'd probably be horrified. And that's without buying everything new like so many readers do. I'm not wealthy, but I do have very supportive parents, and no shortage of tip money, which still makes me, in my opinion, a privileged person. For lower income readers, or those who don't have the same level of support, I can imagine this aspect of the community is very disheartening, and it's too easy for most of us to overlook that. Nobody talks about it, but if you read enough books, and buy them too, you'll realize that reading isn't a cheap hobby, nor an affordable one if you're doing it to impress others. This is to say nothing of the privilege of reading itself. Even if many readers have the money to buy books, many don't have the time to read hundreds of them in a 12-month period. With the responsibility of full-time jobs, children, and relationships, many readers are lucky if they can read one book in a year, making this community a depressing place to be if they can't live up to the numbers game. Personally, I'm not against challenging yourself or sharing book hauls, as it can be an uplifting experience for yourself and other people watching. But when you pause to consider how much money and time you're sinking into such a challenge, it's shocking, and it's worth acknowledging that others don't share the same privilege as you do. All in all, reading 100 books in 1 year has been a positive experience for me. But while I enjoyed myself, it's not necessarily something I would want to do every year. I hardly knew what to expect going into the challenge. Mostly, I just wanted to be able to say I'd done it, like someone who has climbed Mount Everest. And I wanted to develop a reading habit, which I largely succeeded at doing, though I've fallen off since completing the challenge, with that greater motivation having been removed. Taking everything I've learned together, from the occasional lack of originality to the privilege required, or the fact that there's some truly good work out there, but no way to read it all, I have to conclude that reading 100 books in a year can be a good thing, though not for everyone. Plenty of readers hated the books that were recommended to them through BookTok, finding them lacking in originality, while others have starved themselves so as to purchase all the newest hardcovers. In the end, it should come back to the passion of reading. While it feels good to own a first edition, there's no shame in reading a used copy. Whether your book has sprayed edges or not, you're still enjoying the same great story as anyone else, and that's what counts. Now, if you're determined to try this challenge, but aren't rich, there are ways to load up your shelves without breaking the bank. Be it the acquisition of used copies, or the many ways in which you can get books, even new releases, for free, there are ways to save. For those with money but little of it, the video on the left will tell you how to shop affordably. And for those without money, the video on the right will take you through several ways you can get books for free. As always, thank you for watching, and happy reading!